A boy, linked to the lineage of avatars, awakens after being trapped inside ice in the ocean for 100 years. He must master the powers of the four elements, fire, water, air, and earth, so that he can defeat dangerous enemies and put an end to the war. In the capital city, while being pursued, a soldier of the Earth Kingdom attempts to escape while battling a group of firebenders. Fighting with sheer strength and skill, he demonstrates that he is a formidable earthbender. Just as he locates his friend and prepares to flee, he is struck by a fire attack. Yet instead of fleeing in fear, he fights back. He entrusts a crucial document to his friend, instructing him to deliver it to the king, as war is imminent. To ensure his friend's escape, he erects a massive earthen wall, choosing to remain behind and fight the firebenders alone. That very night, he is captured and taken as a prisoner before Sozin, the ruler of the Fire Nation. Upon learning that the next attack will be launched against the air nomads, he is burned alive. For a long time, the four nations lived in peace, as the Avatar maintained global balance by mastering all four elements. When an Avatar dies, their spirit is reborn into another body, and this cycle continues endlessly. However, following the death of the previous Avatar, no new Avatar emerged. Seizing this opportunity, Sozin devises a plan to conquer the world. Knowing that the next Avatar is destined to be born among the air nomads, he orders his army to exterminate every airbender. Yet, one boy among them somehow manages to survive. A 12-year-old boy named Aang, who resides in a monastery, is an airbender far more skilled than any other child his age. All the monks are aware that Aang is, in fact, the Avatar. However, his mentor, Gyatso, argues that he is still too young to begin mastering the remaining three elements. Nevertheless, the council decides that Aang must be prepared immediately, as the Fire Nation could launch its war at any moment. When Aang discovers that when told that he must leave the monastery, he begins to weep, for he does not wish to be separated from his friends. Guru Gyatso counsels him, and Aang accepts the responsibility of being the Avatar. That very evening, Aang sets out for a ride with his flying bison, Appa. Unbeknownst to them, the Fire Nation army is advancing to attack the monastery. When the battle begins, the airbenders join forces to try to defeat the enemies. They possess skilled warriors as well, but the Fire Nation proves to be the more formidable force, having spent weeks preparing for this very assault. After incinerating their enemies, Sozin and his army advance to capture the children hiding under Gyatso's protection. As the Fire Lord battles a powerful airbender, he remarks that the airbenders might have stood a chance of survival had the comet not amplified his army's power that fateful night. Fueled by that very power, the Fire Nation wins the war and slaughters every airbender within the monastery. Unaware that his people are in peril, Aang decides to return home as a storm begins to brew at sea. On their way back, Aang and Appa get caught in the storm and plunge into the ocean. Upon hitting the water, Aang loses consciousness, and Appa, too, drifts into oblivion. At that very moment, the Avatar's power spontaneously awakens, encasing Aang in a massive block of ice to preserve him. 100 years later, while navigating a lake in their boat, Katara and Sokka spot a colossal block of ice from which Aang eventually emerges. Finding Aang unconscious, Katara brings him back to her village. Upon seeing the tattoos adorning his body, her grandmother declares that he is an airbender. The moment the Avatar awakens, Prince Zuko, a nearby member of the Fire Nation, spots a massive beam of light shooting into the sky. Zuko realizes that the Avatar has returned and resolves to capture him. Zuko seeks to regain his father's trust so that he may return home and claim his rightful place as the future king. When Aang regains consciousness, he realizes he is far from home. He immediately takes flight in search of Appa. Aang lets out a whistle, and Appa instantly comes soaring to his side. As Aang recounts how he came to be trapped in the ice, he makes a devastating discovery. All the air nomads are dead. This leaves him deeply saddened. To console him, Katara reveals that her mother, too, was killed by firebenders, and that her father had left the village to hunt down the enemies. Katara is one of the last waterbenders of the southern tribe, as all the others were wiped out by the enemies. The Fire Nation had exiled her from her home, yet she remained incredibly talented and powerful. She did not have the freedom to openly practice and hone her abilities, for if she were spotted or captured, she faced the imminent threat of execution. As Kara was demonstrating her powers to Aang, she spotted a ship approaching from a distance. Moments later, she realized that the vessel belonged to their enemy nation. She rushed back to her village and warned Sokka that an enemy attack was imminent. At that moment, Kara realized that the Fire Nation forces had come there specifically to find Aang. for he was not merely the last airbender, but the Avatar himself. Upon discovering Aang's true identity, she resolved to conceal him. Meanwhile, Sokka challenged Zuko to a duel. Since Sokka did not possess the ability to waterbend, he was easily defeated, and the enemy soldiers were on the verge of killing him. Just then, Aang arrived on the scene and intervened in the battle. Using his staff, Aang deflected the enemy's attacks. At that same moment, the people of the Water Tribe joined the fray. Realizing that Zuko intended to destroy the entire village, Aang surrendered himself to the enemy in order to save his friends. When the enemy took Aang away, Sokka and Katara decided that they would go to rescue him. To save Aang, they mounted Appa, the flying bison, and set off toward the ship. At that very moment, Aang somehow managed to escape from his captivity and, grabbing his staff, began to flee. Just then, the enemy hurled a fireball at him, causing him to fall. As Aang was on the verge of plunging into the sea, Sokka grabbed him and saved him. Then, Aang, Sokka, and Katara all fled the scene. Aang realized that he could no longer return to his old village. Consequently, the trio decided to head to Aang's former home, the monastery. For the first time in a long while, Aang had the opportunity to see what his monastery had become following the Fire Nation's attack. There, he discovered the bones of his mentor, Gyatso, and was overcome with emotion. Suddenly, the tattoos on Aang's body began to glow, and a violent storm of wind began to swirl around him. Due to this storm, Sokka and Katara's lives were put in jeopardy. After a short while, Aang calmed down and regained control over his powers. Aang now resolved to restore peace and balance to the world. Therefore, he decided that he would learn to master the remaining 3 elements: water, fire, and earth. While exploring the monastery, Aang encountered a flying lemur, a small creature. The lemur, too, decided to join them on their journey to Kyoshi Island. When Aang, Katara, and Sokka arrived at Kyoshi Island, the Kyoshi warriors there were astonished to see them and immediately captured Katara and Sokka. At that very moment, the eyes of the statue of the previous Avatar, located nearby, began to glow, and the people realized that Aang was, in fact, the new Avatar. At her mother's behest, Suki took Aang, Katara, and Sokka to her home to stay. Suki informed them that they could remain on the island for only 48 hours. Can they remain? The next morning, Kara wakes up early and begins her training. This is because, prior to her arrival there, her grandmother had given her a scroll, a book of knowledge. Inscribed within that scroll were techniques and teachings for controlling water. After completing her training, Kara assists Aang in his search for information regarding Avatar Kyoshi. Meanwhile, Sokka is learning various combat techniques from Suki. When Aang realizes that the spirits of the past avatars reside within him, he begins to meditate in an attempt to communicate with the former avatar, Kyoshi. Eventually, through meditation, he succeeds in connecting with Avatar Kyoshi. Just as Aang is contemplating what steps he should take to maintain peace across the 4 nations, the Fire Nation army arrives and launches an attack on the village. The soldiers encounter Yukari, the leader of the tribe. Yukari asserts that, aside from Commander Zhao's forces, she has not seen any other outsiders on her island. Consequently, the commander orders his soldiers to conduct a thorough search of the entire island. At that very moment, the Kyoshi warriors decide to take action and engage in battle. Shortly thereafter, Prince Zuko arrives on the island with his uncle, and Kara is forced to fight him. However, since Kara was still in the early stages of learning waterbending, she is defeated in the battle. Just as the enemy is about to strike the killing blow, Avatar Kyoshi suddenly manifests. Because the location was in close proximity to Kyoshi's temple, the ancient Avatar Kyoshi appears through the body of Aang. She then proceeds to pursue Commander Zhao. Since Avatar Kyoshi possessed complete mastery over all 4 elements, air, water, fire, and earth, she single-handedly defeats the entire army. Consequently, the commander is left with no choice but to order a retreat. Once the battle concludes, Aang reverts to his normal form. Following this event, the inhabitants of the island begin to hold Aang in high esteem, for they now harbor the hope that Aang can restore peace to the world. Before departing, Sokka bids farewell to Suki and shares a kiss with her. In return, Suki presents Sokka with her fan as a parting gift. That very afternoon, Aang, Sokka, and Kara set out on a journey toward the Northern Water Tribe. They do so because Aang had received a warning that, in the wake of the events on Kyoshi Island, something ominous was about to unfold. Commander Zhao dispatches a letter to the Fire Lord, informing him that the Avatar has returned. That same night, an attack is launched against Fire Lord Ozai's palace. However, thanks to the intervention of Zuko's sister, Azula, the attackers are apprehended. The Fire Lord is a ruthless ruler who never shows mercy to his enemies. Thus, he mercilessly incinerates his adversaries with fire. Upon reaching the city of Omashu, Aang, Sokka, and Kara encounter a merchant named Jet. They request his assistance in gaining entry into the fortress, as the guards typically deny access to commoners and outsiders. Shortly after passing through the fortress gates, Aang witnesses a massive explosion. It comes into view. Then, Aang uses his airbending powers to clear away the smoke. At that very moment, Teo realizes that Aang is an airbender, one who controls the wind. Teo asks his father to provide Katara and her friends with a place to stay in their home. While speaking with Teo, Aang, Sokka, and Katara discover that this attack was not an isolated incident. Rather, the Fire Nation has carried out many such attacks in the past. This operation was carried out by the Fire Nation's firebenders, whose spies were hidden at various locations throughout the city, keeping a close watch. Upon witnessing the immense devastation caused by the conflict, Aang temporarily shelved his plans to head north and decided to remain in the city of Omashu to assist the people. Later that same afternoon, Katara observed Sai conversing with a Fire Nation spy, leading her to suspect that Sai was betraying his own people. At that very moment, Katara crossed paths with Jet once again, and together, they decided to pursue the Bender into the forest. Little did they know that the enemy was laying a trap for them, and that they would soon be forced to face them alone. When Jet realized he was being overpowered in the ensuing skirmish, he decided to summon his friends for reinforcements. Subsequently, several orphaned children joined Jet's team, and together, they succeeded in defeating the firebenders. Afterward, Katara accompanied them to a village hidden deep within the forest, where she discovered that all the orphaned children resided. Their families had been wiped out by the Fire Nation, prompting them to unite and pledge to fight for their freedom. Meanwhile, Tao and Aang conducted an investigation and uncovered the truth. The explosion that had occurred was not caused by the firebenders, but by Jet. Upon learning this, Katara attempted to intervene and save Jet, setting out to find evidence that would prove Sai was the true traitor. However, Katara was astonished to discover that Jet and his friends had already devised a plan to eliminate Sai. They had swapped his suitcase, replacing it with a box packed with explosive jelly. Katara tried to reason with Jet, explaining that this was a gravely misguided plan, as it could result in the deaths of innocent people. Then he realized that Aang was right, so he asked his friends for help in finding Sokka. Just then, Prince Zuko and Iroh suddenly arrived to capture Aang. Aang told Katara and Sokka to head toward the palace, while he himself stayed behind to fight Zuko. When Katara arrived at the scene, she noticed a young boy perched in a tree, about to fire an arrow. Katara immediately extinguished the fiery arrow with a powerful stream of water. While fighting Aang, Zuko drew the guard's attention toward himself. He was then forced to flee the area, as the townspeople detested firebenders. To save Zuko, his uncle Iroh used his own powers to divert the guard's attention. Amidst the soldiers' shouted orders and the ensuing chaos, Zuko seized the opportunity to make his escape. However, Aang is captured because the people suspect that he was the one who started the fire. While in prison, Aang encounters General Iroh once again and discovers that, unlike his brother, Iroh does not support this war. When the soldiers bring Aang before the king, he is shocked to find that the king is none other than his childhood friend, Bumi. Meanwhile, Zuko steals a soldier's uniform so he can pose as a guard to infiltrate the palace and rescue his uncle, who was being taken down into a well-like pit. When Katara and Sokka realize that their friend is trapped inside the palace, they decide to enter through the underground tunnels to rescue him. While navigating the tunnels, Katara and Sokka run into a massive, mole-like creature guarding the passageways, forcing them to flee in terror. Their escape leads them to a dead end with no way forward, leaving them with no choice but to give up. As the two, terrified, instinctively grasp each other's hands, the mole creature lunges to attack them. However, at that very moment, Katara realizes that the animal is blind. Creatures of this species do not rely on sight, but rather react to people's emotions, specifically the feeling of love. Consequently, Sokka manages to convince the mole creature to help them and guide them into the palace. When Zuko spots the soldiers escorting his uncle elsewhere, he attacks them and, fighting single-handedly, defeats the Earthbenders. Zuko then frees his uncle, Iroh, and together they battle the remaining soldiers. After the fight concludes, Iroh is left injured, and Zuko helps him escape the city. Later, after dinner, Bumi challenges his old friend Aang to a duel, and Aang, out of necessity, That challenge has to be accepted. In reality, King Bumi is very angry with Aang because he feels that Aang remained missing for so many years and left him all alone. Bumi believes that Aang is responsible for this war, for had Aang not been trapped inside the ice in the ocean, the lives of many people could have been saved. At that moment, Bumi drops 2 massive boulders, and Aang is forced to use his powers to suspend them in mid-air, for if they were to fall, one of their lives could be lost. King Bumi then tells Aang that he must choose one option, for being the Avatar entails making difficult and momentous decisions. However, Aang is absolutely unwilling to let his friend Bumi die, and flatly refuses to do so. Just then, Katara and Sokka arrive on the scene, and with Katara's assistance, Sokka manages to capture Bumi, thereby saving Aang. During the ensuing conversation, Aang finds the opportunity to both ensure his own safety and reconcile with his old friend, Bumi. Aang then discovers that Sai was not a traitor after all, but rather a spy sent to uncover the Fire Nation's secrets, an operative working for both sides. After leaving the palace, Aang and his friends stumble upon a village situated deep within the forest. They learn that the people of this village, too, had been subjected to an attack by the Fire Nation. The surrounding trees had been burned down to clear a path toward the mountains, and when the villagers ventured out in search of food, many of them mysteriously vanished. Aang then remarks that he has a hunch as to where they might be and decides to set out to find them. As they make their way through the forest, Aang tells his friends that he senses a disturbance, a gateway leading toward the spirit world, and he suspects that the villagers may be trapped there. A short while later, they come across an altar built to honor the forest spirits. Aang sits down peacefully on a rock, preparing to meditate. As Aang enters the spirit world, he inadvertently draws his friends in along with him. There, they encounter the spirit of knowledge, who takes the form of a colossal owl. The spirit informs Aang that there is a wise individual residing in a stone dwelling who might be able to offer assistance. The spirit then issues a warning to Aang that there are also dangerous creatures that could harm his friends. A short while later, they encounter the spirit of the forest, and Aang realizes that it had been injured during a previous attack. The 3 of them get separated, and each is forced to confront the most sorrowful memories of their lives. Katara and Sokka relive the tragic moments of their past, while Aang reaches a stone structure and encounters the spirit of Gyatso. Gyatso reveals to Aang that a dangerous monster is lurking within the mist. That monster is named Ko, and he has imprisoned the villagers, along with Katara and Sokka, inside his cave. Gyatso explains that a previous incarnation of the Avatar once defeated this monster. To acquire the power needed to do so, Aang must travel to the Fire Nation, as that is where Roku's temple is located. Leaving his friends in safety, Aang departs for his next destination, traveling on his glider staff. Zuko and Iroh hire a mercenary to help them locate the Avatar quickly, as she possesses a creature capable of tracking anyone by scent. Upon reaching the Fire Lord's palace, Aang, with the assistance of a guard, makes his way to the temple and communes with his past incarnation. He discovers that Roku had once stolen a sacred artifact linked to Ko's mother. Aang resolves to use this totem as leverage to secure the release of his friends. Just as Aang is about to leave, June and her creature suddenly appear on the scene. The creature immobilizes Aang with its saliva, rendering him unable to move. Later, Aang awakens inside a cave, where Zuko and Iroh arrive to capture him and take him back to the palace. On their journey, Zuko and Iroh are ambushed by Zhao's forces, Zhao having since been promoted to the rank of admiral. Zuko is ordered to capture the Avatar and hand him over to Zhao. While Zhao and his soldiers are preoccupied with their celebrations, they remain oblivious as a masked intruder infiltrates the fortress and launches an attack. Defeating the firebending soldiers in his path, the masked warrior reaches the prison cells and liberates Aang. Aang and the masked figure attempt to make their escape across the rooftops, but they are intercepted by the soldiers. Aang uses his powers to fend off their attackers, while the warrior defeats his enemies with his swords. When they find themselves cornered, the warrior pushes Aang to the forefront, knowing that Zhao would never risk killing the Avatar. When the masked figure issues a threat, Zhao orders the gates to be opened, allowing both of them to make their escape. Once they have traveled a short distance, Zhao orders his archers to take down the warrior. At that very moment, Aang realizes that the person behind the mask was, in fact, Zuko. Aang knows that escaping alone would be far easier, yet he decides to take Zuko with him to ensure he isn't captured. While hiding in a cave, Aang learns that the burn scar on Zuko's face was inflicted by his own father as a form of punishment. As he parts ways with Zuko, Aang remarks that had they met under different circumstances, they could have been good friends. Zuko makes his way back to his ship by boat. Upon seeing him, Iroh feels both overjoyed and relieved. Sometime later, Aang returns to the forest and contacts the spirit world to speak with Ko, offering his mother's sacred pendant in exchange. Ko finally releases his captives, allowing Aang to rescue his friends and the villagers who had gone missing. The following morning, Lieutenant G wakes Zuko to inform him that a warrant for his arrest has now been issued. Zhao has discovered that it was Zuko who rescued the Avatar, and in doing so, he provoked the Fire Lord against himself. Zuko attempts to flee, but he discovers that Zhao had laid a trap to kill him. Explosives had been planted on his boat, and an archer fired an arrow, blowing the vessel to smithereens. The following day, Aang and his friends arrive at the Northern Water Tribe and meet with its leader. Delighted, Arnuk introduces Aang to Master Pakku and Princess Yue. Before beginning his training, Aang visits the temple to seek guidance from the previous avatar, Kuruk. Kuruk tells him that he cannot offer assistance and that Aang must find the strength within himself. Upon their arrival, Katara begins learning how to use waterbending to heal people's injuries. When Katara discovers that women are not permitted to fight, she stands up against this rule and decides to challenge Master Pakku. The old master insists that Katara must adhere to the tribe's ancient traditions and therefore cannot be granted permission to fight in battle. To prove that she, too, is capable of fighting, Katara challenges Master Pakku to a one-on-one duel. Although Katara has never been formally trained by a teacher, she proves herself to be a highly skilled and gifted warrior. Despite her prowess, she is unable to defeat Master Pakku and is ultimately forced to concede defeat. Nevertheless, impressed by her bravery despite her loss, Pakku and the other young warriors begin to hold her in high esteem. As the Fire Nation fleet draws near, the three friends fly atop Appa toward the enemy ships and attempt to engage them in battle. Despite being vastly outnumbered, they manage to inflict significant damage upon the vessels, thereby slowing down the enemy's advance. While flying above the clouds, they spot a massive enemy army marching toward the city, a sight that makes it seem as though the battle is all but lost. Zuko is among the ranks of that army. Having survived the earlier explosion, he is now determined to capture the Avatar and return home. The city, seeing the danger, Kara decides to fight herself and urges the other waterbenders to join the battle as well. Now, Master Pakku is left with no choice but to grant these young people permission to participate in the war. On the night of the full moon, known as the Ice Moon, Admiral Zhao plans to destroy the moon spirit, which appears only once a year. At that very moment, Kara's spirit appears before Aang and reveals to him what the Admiral intends to do. Aang immediately informs Kara of this impending danger, and the two set out to find Sokka and Yue. Suddenly, Zuko arrives on the scene. Kara tells her friend to press on while she stays behind to hold Zuko off. Shortly thereafter, Aang reunites with his friends and apprises them of the Admiral's perilous plan. Meanwhile, the Admiral locates the two carp, the vessels of the spirits, and captures the fish representing the moon spirit. The instant the fish is caught, the moon turns red, and Aang attempts to reason with the Admiral, pleading with him to release the fish. Iroh intervenes to assist Aang and manages to free the fish. However, just before it can be returned to the lake, the Admiral kills it with a knife. The moment the fish dies, the Water Tribe is weakened, and their bending abilities vanish completely. As the Firebenders launch their attack, the King and the Master retreat, while the soldiers engage in direct combat. To save the world, Aang merges with the ocean spirit, his body becoming the vessel for the spirit's power. Enraged by the harm inflicted upon the moon spirit, the ocean spirit begins to lay waste to the enemy forces. At this juncture, Zuko spots Zhao attempting to flee and challenges him to a duel. Zuko defeats him but spares his life. However, when Zhao attempts to launch a sneak attack from behind, Iroh intervenes and strikes him down. The ocean spirit proceeds to obliterate every single one of the enemy ships. Even after the battle has ended, Aang remains fused with the spirit, who wanders endlessly in search of her companion. Yue, who was granted life in her childhood by the spirit of the moon, decides to sacrifice her own life to restore the balance of the world. As Yue makes this sacrifice, the moon returns to the sky, and the spirit of the ocean is calmed. With Katara's help, Aang regains consciousness and returns to the Avatar state. Once the battle concludes, people gather the bodies of the fallen warriors. Witnessing all of this, Aang is overcome with grief. His friends offer him courage and promise to help him restore peace to the world.